So it gives me good pleasure to actually welcome the energy consultants, Arden Energy, who are completing the Energy Masterplan and Register of Opportunities for the Cabra area. Arden Energy were involved in the development of the first sustainable energy communities to be set up in Dundalk, I think in 2006 to 2009, and have widespread experience of completing similar EMP and Register of Opportunities here in the Greater Dublin area. They've developed energy master plans for Knockline, Dalkey, Ringsend, Irishtown, Batterstown, Drimna, similar enough housing here to Cabra, and have worked as project coordinators for community-led SEA communities projects in Ringsend also. So without further delay, I'd like you all to welcome Fergal Purcell from Arden Energy. Thanks very much, guys.
Thanks, Justin. Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me here. So we were very happy, delighted to be appointed by Connecting-Cabra SEC to develop the Energy Masterplan. So the Energy Masterplan basically is it's a kind of an approach that's prescribed or promoted by SEAI on how to sort of come up with a plan, an action plan for sustainable energy communities in terms of taking actions and identifying opportunities to save energy, save CO2, and taking action then to kind of realize or achieve those objectives or opportunities. So the first thing is to develop the baseline energy consumption. So it's like how much energy is being used and what's it being used for. So we would do that in terms of residential, kind of tertiary, which would be commercial and public sector then, and then also transport. And that's really based on analysis of statistics. So the CSO have, you know, obviously the census, so there's quite a lot of information on house types, occupancy, transport, kind of patterns and preferences in the census data. And then SEAI have a database of BEORs, and then they also have a heat map of the whole country. So you can kind of, you know, look at the top down, like what are the overall energy demands in the area. And then at the same time, we kind of do bottom up, as in do a survey of the community and ask questions about, you know, individual consumption patterns and individual behavior. Then following on from that is to do representative audits. So basically, you know, and I think Cabra will be good because I think there's probably particular house types. So Justin mentioned we did Drimna before. And, you know, like 90% of the houses in Drimna were of, you know, probably 6 or 7 different types that were built over the years. And I think just kind of going around Cabra, it seems to be that there are kind of typical houses. So it's going to be a question of kind of selecting, you know, characterizing the housing by type. And then, again, we'll have the top-down analysis where we'll be going, well, this type of house typically uses, you know, built in the 1930s, terraced house, you know, whatever, is typically, you know, X, B, or, and these are the typical opportunities in those houses. And then also we will identify individual houses to do audits on them. I think the criteria for that is one, you know, how interested are the people in the house in actually taking action or doing something about energy efficiency, and two, in terms of getting like a representative sample of houses and covering that as much as possible. And then on the tertiary, then it's a case of kind of selecting a number of non-domestic buildings for energy audits. And again, the criteria for that, I think, you know, one is kind of community outreach. So GA clubs, sports clubs, community halls, community centres are perfect because, you know, there's a lot of people, a lot of engagement with the community. So by doing the energy audits in these ones, in these types of public kind of participation buildings, it's a good way of increasing kind of awareness. And coming out of those audits, then we'll, you know, there'll be a register of opportunities. So saying, look at, like here are the opportunities to save energy. So in houses, it'll be, I'll come to it, what like a typical energy audit for a house would look like. And then a typical energy audit for a building might say, look, if you need LED lights, you could get solar PV, you could get heating controls, maybe you could take out your old gas boiler and put in a heat pump instead. So we'll come up with a list of actions to save energy there. And then that'll all feed into like a sustainable energy roadmap. Like, so actually what are the kind of particular actions that are going to be taken? And then that'll kind of feed in then hopefully into actually implementing projects. And then SEAI have grants to support, to kind of part fund projects that are done through SECs or through communities. Okay, next slide, please. So this is just a preliminary analysis. So again, this is the kind of top-down CSO/SEAI data. And up in the top right-hand corner there, it's a map of the BERs in the area. So you can see like there's areas there which are kind of quite red, kind of dark red, and that's looking at a median BER of about E, or maybe worse, maybe even down to F. And then there's one little area there where it's kind of green, so that's, you know, newer builds. I'd imagine you go in there and you'll probably find some new build housing or apartments or something that were built in the last 5 years that are kind of A-rated. And that, so again, this will kind of inform then the next step, which will be the kind of the characterization of the housing types and the houses for the audits. We have kind of got a preliminary, and we'll kind of do some more work in this, but we've got a preliminary sort of overall energy baseline, and which is looking at a total residential energy spend of almost 13 million euros a year, and a total commercial energy spend of approaching kind of 3 million. And then up in the top left, I've just kind of broken down like the CO2 emissions, and that's just from commercial and residential. So transport has to be done yet. I suppose that's the thing that isn't in there. So obviously we're going to include transport. I suppose it's slightly surprised. Well, I was slightly surprised that commercial was, our tertiary was such a big chunk of the pie. Like I thought it was going to be almost exclusively residential. But then I do think the kind of Grange Gorman campus is probably included in there as well. So I think that might kind of skew it. I had a look. There's kind of 3 small areas, and you know, kind of like 60 or 70% of the tertiary energy uses in those small areas. So that's kind of like, in general, it's predominantly housing, and then there's kind of a couple of little islands of kind of higher intensity commercial. Okay, next slide then. Yeah, I'll get through this quickly then. So this is the domestic energy audits, which is probably actually maybe what a lot of you are kind of more interested in. If you're kind of householders and you're wondering, well, what can I actually do, you know, in terms of making my house more energy efficient? So the domestic energy audits will be based on the SEAI's kind of dwelling energy assessment procedure that's used for building energy rating, basically. So it'll be a kind of a starting BER for that house type. So we say like, okay, maybe it starts off at an E2. And then it'll be kind of a series of measures that can be implemented to improve the energy efficiency. So we typically kind of characterize it as basic, intermediate, or advanced. So basic is you know, single measures that can be done and that'll make an appreciable difference to the energy efficiency of a house, but you know, won't cost tens of thousands of euros. And that would be stuff like, you know, heating controls, probably LED lights, draft proofing, those type of things, where attic insulation would be in there as well if the attic isn't insulated. So the kinds of things, you know, where it's, you know, a couple of thousand euros to do an individual measure, and it's a relatively good, you know, shortish payback as these things go. And then the SEAI have grants for individual measures. So things like heating controls will be grant aided, attic insulation will be grant aided. So those are the kind of standalone measures. Then kind of in intermediate, you're kind of looking at, wall insulation. So that's the kind of maybe the big step is when you go and say, look, at my house is built in 1930 and it's got no insulation in the walls. So I'm either going to get internal wall insulation or external wall insulation. And then that is, you're into, well, over 10,000 euros definitely, and probably more, so that's kind of getting into the more expensive measures. And then you're into, really having to go for a B2 energy rating. So that's to qualify for SEI's grants. For wall insulation or for communities grant, you have to get to a B2. So the intermediate would be like improving up to a B2 energy rating, which would be kind of wall insulation, not necessarily a heat pump, maybe a heat pump, but you might just get there with insulation if you have a kind of a pretty good condensing gas boiler. Like I did my own house last year and didn't get a heat pump, but we just did insulation and solar PV and got up to a B1. So, but that's it. You can kind of pick and choose measures a little bit on intermediate, and then advanced is really like the kind of deep retrofit where you're aiming for whatever, A3 or better, or A2, and you're doing wall insulation, heat pump, maybe solar PV as well, and a range of measures. And for each of those, we'll kind of give indicative costs and paybacks. Stuff is getting more expensive all the time now, I think. So what we might have said for costs a year ago probably doesn't even stand anymore. But then at the same time, SEI's grants have improved as well.
1 minute there, Fergal.
Yeah, and I think that's it really. I'm coming to kind of conclude on that. So the process then on the I suppose the next step, let's say, is we have developed a survey that we hope to disseminate around the community, and then when we get responses to that together with the SEC committee, would be to select kind of candidate houses for energy audits, and to look at it like that. So I suppose that's the next step.
Super, that's great. Now, as we said earlier, we're going to wait until questions to the end, if that's okay.